Elsa recalled how she had once found herself all alone in a huge mansion. It seemed that fate itself, like an inexorable instrument, was leading her to marry a mad duke obsessed with war. She couldn't believe what was happening was true. The duke embraced her with frightening tenderness, assuring her that he couldn't live without her. And the little children clung to her skirt as if they had known her for a long time. It all made her feel confused and bewildered. Was this really her new reality? Or was it all some kind of mistake? Only a few months ago, Elsa had been living in the Duchy of Zonneberg. She remembered sitting at the large table in the family dining room with her relatives. Seated next to her was her half-sister Karen, the birth daughter of the Duke of Zonneberg and Claudia. Then, accidentally dropping the knife, she picked it up fearfully, and apologizing, met the calm gaze of her stepmother, Duchess Claudia, who gently but sternly advised caution. It had seemed like an ordinary family evening, but now looking back it seemed to Elsa like the last moment of peace before the storm. 6 months had passed since then. Now, panting under the weight of events, she listened as Duke Valen, a man with an icy voice, told her that she must pull herself together. She was to be Duke Isbel's wife in a month. Those words horrified Elsa. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. In her mind, Duke Icebel was an almost mythical figure, the man who had ended the years-long war between the Sire Empire and the Kingdom of Silboa. He was surrounded by dark rumors, including that he had killed his own brother for power, and now this was the man she was to tie her life to. Her father, noticing her confusion, calmly explained that it was His Majesty's will. The Grand Duke cannot be alone, and in Elsa they saw a worthy bride of status and age. It was a revelation to her. It was the first time she had heard of this decision, but according to her father, it was not up for discussion. Bringing his glass to his lips, he coldly remarked that she should hurry up with her wedding preparations. Elsa tried to stop this ruthless process, asking for time. But at that moment, Claudia announced that she would take over her training. Duke Valen only noted sternly that he had already decided everything and she should keep quiet and obey. There was a slight sound. Elsa clucked her tongue in displeasure. That's when her sister Karen reminded her father of her upcoming birthday. Elsa wondered, was Karen's birthday celebration more important than the fate of her Elsa, who was to marry the legendary but intimidating Duke? And then she realized that for the family she had always been in the background. It had been that way from the beginning. She remembered a day from her childhood when she lay in bed with a fever. There was a wet rag on her forehead, but suddenly there was a noise outside the door. The girl rose, opened the door, and saw the servants bustling about, bringing flowers, cloth, and dishes. Asking one of the maids what was going on, she cheerfully replied, it was Miss Karen's birthday. Elsa felt her heart clench. The maid asked if she was going to join the celebration. After a little thought, the girl began to speak. Said she wasn't feeling well and so would refrain from this invitation. Returning to the bed, she heard a conversation outside the door. The women were discussing her. Someone remarked that the girls had different mothers, and come to think of it, no one ever celebrated Elsa's birthday. After all, that was the day her mother died. Tears ran down her cheeks. Her mom died shortly after giving birth, and Claudia became the Duke's second wife. And a year later, her half-sister Karen was born to them. She was cutting food at the family table, and the memories seemed especially heavy. Too often, her father and stepmother had treated her coldly, like a stranger. And now, looking back, Elsa realized clearly she couldn't change anything. Karen said with concern that even though the ball had gone well, she was worried about her sister. Elsa was going to be a great duchess, but she didn't know how to use magic. Elsa glanced at her, continuing to drink in silence. The stepmother noted with a slight chuckle that Elsa had neither magic nor social skills, but perhaps in the Grand Duke's house she would try not to embarrass their family. Her father suddenly interrupted the conversation, noting that he had originally considered marrying Karen off to Duke Isbel. But Karen intervened sharply, saying that she did not want to live in an abandoned corner of the world where snow was the only attraction. Claudia's mother began to protest loudly at the same moment, resenting the fact that her precious daughter was not meant to live far from the center of the empire, among the snows and barbarians. The white-haired girl watched quietly and realized again how important and beloved her half-sister was to the family. Karan continued speaking, emphasizing that Elsa had long been rumored to be a burden to the Sonneberg family. If things continue in this way, her marriage could make Karen herself an object of ridicule in high society. Elsa listened to this, not understanding why she deserved such an attitude. She couldn't find fault with herself, but accusations and recriminations came from all sides. Claudia supported her daughter, adding that it was a problem not only for Elsa as a person, but for the whole duchy. All this was building up like a snowball, and the girl couldn't follow the course of the conversation. Then her stepmother turned to her and, with cold interest in her voice, inquired what Elsa herself thought of all that was going on. The girl took a deep breath and replied. She admitted that she completely agreed. Her marriage to the Grand Duke would be a disgrace not only to their ducal family, but to the entire empire. Her voice sounded frustrated and tired. She reminded the audience of how all of her home teachers, mentors, and even maids had once been handed over to Karan, leaving Elsa completely unsupported and unattended. Everything that belonged to her was given without a second thought to her half-sister to get the best for her. Now she, Elsa, is being sacrificed to preserve her reputation, protect Karen, and fulfill the Emperor's will. She felt she was just being used, and she spoke of it without malice, with cold clarity. Claudia shrieked, accusing the girl of being impertinent and trying to question her father's decision. But Elsa calmly rose from the table. She explained that she wasn't seeking to offend anyone, just call things by their proper names. She didn't care about being taken advantage of anymore. If she had to be a pawn in someone else's game anyway, she would at least try to get her share of it, and asked me to help her prepare for the perfect marriage she was destined to find herself in. A month had passed. A carriage drove slowly down the snowy street through the snowstorm. Inside, wrapped in warm furs, sat Elsa. Although she couldn't say that everything had gone perfectly, the wedding preparations had been completed on time. The maid Maria sat across from her, sobbing quietly. Elsa thanked her softly for her constant loyalty and help, for always being there for her when everyone else turned their backs on her. Maria brushed away a tear, trying to smile at her pupil, but there was a deep sadness in her eyes. It was hard for the girl, too. It was hard to part with Marcia, the only one who was truly close to her. But she knew that she could not take her servants with her, much less loyal ones. Elsa's thoughts returned to her impending marriage. The man she would have to spend the rest of her life with was obsessed with war and rumored to be dangerous. The more she thought about it, the more she felt anxious and inwardly trembling. And yet she was hopeful. Perhaps by leaving her home she could start a new life, build it on her own terms. The carriage came to a stop. Elsa stepped outside into the snowy void. The cold air burned her skin, the snowy world spread out around her. A man met her, greeting her sternly and formally. However, he suddenly had a drastic change in his face. The girl noticed his reaction with surprise, not realizing what could have hit him so hard. She looked around and saw how much snow there was around her. This was where she was going to live from now on. As the carriage left the courtyard, leaving her on a new threshold of life, she remained standing, waiting for the Duke. Then turns to the man standing next to him and asks, "Where is the Grand Duke?" He doesn't have time to answer as suddenly someone's voice comes from behind him. Elsa turned around and saw two little boys. One of them was hiding behind the other, huddling against him in fright. The other stood in front of him, shielding him and staring intently at Elsa. She discreetly introduced herself as the bride of the Grand Duke. Shock was reflected on the boys' faces. One of them denies everything and starts conjuring a snow spell with his hand. Shouted that he had never heard of his lordship intending to marry. He could not believe that such a one as she could become the wife of a great duke. The child's words hurt Elsa. She couldn't understand. Did even the children think she was unworthy? The boy declared that she was a fraud and ordered her away, continuing to protect his younger brother, not allowing her to get any closer. Elsa felt completely lost. She had just arrived, and already she found herself in an extremely awkward and unsettling position. Elsa, trying not to get emotional, gently suggested that the children discuss everything calmly first, and asked the eldest of them to stop using dangerous magic. But the boy asked her with defiant confidence if she was afraid of that level of magic. He continued to conjure and added with a sneer that she was probably a common Ludinka, incapable of magic. And if so, how is she even going to become an aristocrat, let alone the consort of a great duke? The girl felt embarrassed, but she admitted without hiding the truth that she really didn't have strong magical abilities. Silence followed her words, both boys staring at her in surprise, not expecting such an answer. After gathering her thoughts, Elsa declared that she was indeed the Duke's bride, and also the daughter of the Duke of Zonneberg. Her origin is not simple at all, nor is she a commoner. Then, with slight surprise, she inquired who they were. The girl's words gave the children a real shock. They looked at each other, not understanding how she could not know who they were. At that moment, a gray-haired man came up to her and explained, discreetly but clearly, that these two were the children of his lordship, the Grand Duke, Mr. Wilbert and Mr. Hugh. They were in the Duke's care at the moment. Elsha remembered that the current duke was the younger brother of the former head of the house, and came to the conclusion these boys were his nephews. New realizations began to form in her mind, and this knowledge shook her somewhat. Now, as the duke's fiancée, she would become their adoptive mother. Before she could fully comprehend the situation, a spark of magic whizzed past her. In an instant, the older boy, Wilbert, realized he had made a mistake. His spell had hit Elsha. She felt a sharp pain, a scratch on her cheek, from which blood immediately flowed. A few strands of her hair were burned and fell to the floor. The girl stared off to the side in shock, not yet realizing what had happened. But then it all came to consciousness, and she cried out in fright. What surprised her, however, was that the boys were even more frightened than she was herself. Even though it was their fault, their eyes reflected genuine horror. Elsha turned her attention to the youngest of her brothers. He had tears in his eyes. The older one immediately stepped between her and her younger brother, shielding the latter from possible danger. Elsha suddenly realized that he was just a child desperately protecting his brother. They were so young that even a simple scratch on an adult's face could make them desperate. Looking at their frightened faces, she remembered her childhood, those moments of fear and loneliness she had once experienced herself. She couldn't look away and clenched her fists. Then, holding back her emotions, she walked toward the children, squatted down in front of them, and calmly apologized for scaring them. Wilbert looked at her in surprise, not expecting her to do such a soft thing. Elsha, on the other hand, smiled and said she was glad to meet them. She introduced herself and asked if they could tell her their names. The children looked at her stunned. In response, Wilbert, still in slight confusion, gave his name, and then introduced his younger brother, Hugh. Elsha admitted with warmth in her voice that she was glad to meet them. At that moment, Hugh raised his hand and pointed to her wound. The girl, trying to calm him down, brushed off her worries and wanted to wipe the blood away, saying she'd gotten worse scratches in her life. However, Wilbert stopped her movement abruptly, gently removing her hand from her face. Elsha looked at him in amazement, not realizing what he was doing. The boy gazed into her palm, as if checking to see if she had damaged anything else. Then he shifted his gaze to the man standing next to him, looked at the girl again, and finally let go of her hand. It was like he was trying to find a way to make amends. Afterward, dismissing his brother, he discreetly but confidently stated that they would take care of her, and motioned for her to follow them into the house. The girl refused any compensation, assuring that she holds no grudge. But Wilbur only turned to the same gray-haired man named Toman. He, understanding the order, invited Elsha to follow him. They entered the luxurious room, where Toman was busy dressing her wound. Elsha was surprised to realize, however, that his care for her had been exaggerated. A huge pile of bandages was wrapped around her head. Her entire hairdo was hidden under white layers, which seemed almost comical. When she pointed this out with a slight smile, the butler calmly explained, Wilbert and Hugh's mother was a very frail woman. Even a small injury could lead her to long illnesses and bed rest. So he asks her to be patient for a while, for the sake of the boy's peace of mind, especially Wilbert, who feels guilty about what happened. Elsha realized that these children had lost their parents too soon. They are now the responsibility of a man everyone calls war-obsessed. And the children themselves, despite their noble origins, are still just children, vulnerable, scared, in need of care. The butler apologized again to Elsha for the inconvenience and admitted that he did plan to tell her everything later, after her husband returned from the expedition. However, that one was unexpectedly delayed. In his defense, he added that initially everyone had expected the bride's arrival only early next year, and her current appearance was a surprise. Elsha listened to this with surprise. On the contrary, she was married in a hurry, assuring that she had to prepare for all obligations by the end of the year. There must have been some misunderstanding between the families. Butler pleaded guilty to this understatement and expressed sincere regret. Elsha quietly remarked that she was under too much pressure with this marriage. Everyone around her claimed it was the most important event in her life. She had no choice but to comply. She then inquired as to when the Grand Duke would return. She heard back that the original plan was for him to return as early as last week. But recently, the butler received a letter from him informing him that the Duke would not be able to arrive by the appointed date. Elsha was stunned. How could he leave his children so carelessly? Wasn't it his duty to be there for them, to bring them up? However, the butler explained that the Duke was indeed worried about his sons, but was rarely at home due to constant unforeseen circumstances. Despite the end of the war, the situation on the border with the former warring kingdom remains unstable. The Grand Dukes, including her future husband, are still involved in conflict resolution. He, like his predecessors, is forced to participate in politics and defense. The butler recalled the times when he himself had served the former duke, and noted with sadness that even then the children often had to be left alone in the mansion. Their mother, moreover, had suffered from poor health and was now recuperating in an estate with a milder climate. Elsa realized that her ideas about the Grand Duke's family, formed on the basis of rumors in the capital, were very different from reality. She was particularly struck by the fact that the children were left in the huge house without constant supervision, as if they were adults and didn't need to be cared for. Later, determined to mend their relationship, she entered Wilbert's room. Elsa gently acknowledged that there had been many misunderstandings between them, and suggested they start fresh, getting to know each other as a family. However, the boy, without raising his eyes from the book, calmly closed it and said coldly that he had no need for flattery or attempts to favor him. He added that she should spend her time as she pleased and wait for the Duke's return. At that moment, the door opened slightly, and Hugh's younger brother peeped into the room with curiosity on his face. But as soon as Elsa turned around, he immediately disappeared and carefully closed the door behind him. It was exactly as she'd expected, cold, closed, and aloof, but she was not going to give up. As time passed, Elsa began to realize that it was becoming difficult for her to even get close to Wilbert. The kids had too busy a schedule. They were busy all the time. Their days were strictly scheduled, and it was as if she was being shunned. Despite this, the girl decided not to lose hope. She was sure that if she could find a common language with them, her stay in the mansion would be easier. That was her plan, and she intended to follow it. Not knowing where to begin, Elsa turned to the maids with a simple question. What kind of food does Mr. Wilbert like? However, no one was able to answer her. One of the maids noted that the boy is complex and indifferent to food, often even skips meals. Hugh, on the contrary, eats almost everything, never stating his preferences. The conversation shifted smoothly to her younger brother, and this particularly interested Elsa. The servants, embarrassed, avoided specifics. The girl realized that the boy probably had a very monotonous diet or showed no interest in food at all. She began asking everyone from maids to guards about at least one thing that might please the boys. But the answer was everywhere the same. No one knew anything. Elsa began to suspect that not only the children, but the whole house was gripped by a kind of silent wariness. But she also understood this. In an atmosphere of constant anxiety and unpredictability, it is difficult to open up, even to those close to her. Suddenly, a large, massive figure appeared behind her back. One of the cooks, at first glance with a stern expression on his face, suddenly muttered something about carrot cake. Elsa turned around and studied him, and realized, some of the servants of this house have incredible strength and fortitude. After all, they serve a man known to be obsessed with war, and are of the level of the Duke's house. Holding back a smile, she clarified exactly what he meant by carrot cake. The man, without elaboration, replied, when Wilbert and Hugh were very small, they tolerated any food, even food they didn't like, just for the sake of one slice of carrot cake. One of the maids hesitated for a moment before saying that she remembered the carrot cake. She said quietly that after the death of their father, the children no longer showed any interest in this dish. No matter how many times they made it, it remained untouched. Meanwhile, Wilbert sat in his room, surrounded by piles of books, inkwells, and quills. He was irritated and tense, as if he were imposing adult responsibilities on himself. At that moment, Elsa entered the room silently, carrying tea on a tray. She asked him quietly if he wanted to rest and talk for a while. The boy, without taking his eyes off the paper, irritably replied that he saw no point in talking to her. He had nothing to talk to her about. Elsa gently remarked that he looked pale and tired. Despite his duties, he was still a child, and he needed more rest so he wouldn't hurt himself. She gingerly reached out to touch his shoulder reassuringly. But Wilbert sharply pushed her away, slapping her arm, and coldly told her to leave him alone. He declared that he was a future great duke and needed to study, not wasting a minute on idle conversation with a lazy girl who didn't even know magic. Elsa was stunned, her heart squeezed with resentment and incomprehension. She left the room without saying a word. Wilbert remained seated, staring tensely at the wall. His thoughts were racing. When would she finally give up? Was she not like the others? Elsa, meanwhile, ran down the corridor, not noticing the footsteps or the stairs, and soon returned again. She had a soft smile on her face, as if it had never happened. She entered the room with ease, as if for the first time, and apologized for the wait with a cheerful voice. The boy shuddered in surprise and wondered what it was this time. Elsha, without answering, placed a neatly arranged plate with a slice of juicy carrot cake in front of him. Wilbert frowned at first, but then his face changed, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew that pie. His cheeks turned a little pink. He slowly looked up at the girl. Elsha sat down in front of him, placing the tray closer, and asked softly to try at least one bite. The boy was still staring at her dazedly, as if he couldn't understand why she was doing all this. But after a moment, he still reached for his fork, slowly broke off a tiny piece, as if afraid to shatter something fragile. With a slightly trembling hand, he brought the fork to his mouth, and his eyes filled with curiosity and wary hope. He ate a piece of pie, and Elsha watched his reaction with bated breath, tensely waiting to see what the boy would say. What happened next, however, surprised her greatly. Wilbert, saying nothing, silently poked another slice of pie. Carefully, he brought it to his mouth and ate it with noticeable pleasure, then took another bite and ate it again. It was obvious that he really liked the dish. There was an expression on his face that was hard to accurately describe, a mixture of surprise, slight sadness, and perhaps nostalgia. Elsha, smiling a little embarrassed, carefully said that she was relieved, for she had been very worried that he might not like the pie. The boy blushed, looked away, and replied that it wasn't that at all. It was just that the taste of the pie suddenly made him feel nostalgic. Elsha wondered what memories could be associated with this simple treat. She explained that carrot cake is a popular treat across the continent, but recipes vary from region to region. She therefore decided to make the pie using a recipe from Lucivoire. Wilbert raised his eyebrows in surprise. This area was located on the border with Lunamont and was rather obscure. He asked why she had chosen such a rare recipe. His gaze fell back to the pie plate. The girl calmly replied that Lucivoire was Clara's homeland. Hearing his mother's name, Wilbert snickered a little. Elsha looked at him softly and wondered if it brought back fond memories. The boy, however, without raising his gaze, replied that no, not at all. His mom, he said, used to make the pie very differently. It was dry, a little bitter tasting. The girl was surprised. I don't know if that counts as a compliment. She had no special culinary talent and almost never stood at the stove. But sometimes, despite being busy and tired, she still tried to bake a cake. Elsha noted that perhaps that was what she cared about, trying, however unsuccessfully, to show her love. Wilbert flinched slightly at her words, but nodded in agreement. Then, blushing, he suddenly asked why Elsha had managed to make such a delicious pie. She replied with a smile that it's all about winter carrots. They are especially sweet, and this year's crop was unusually good. The boy was surprised. He was amazed that, despite the fact that Elsha was the Duke's daughter and did not possess magic, she can cook so well and use regional ingredients. He asked how she got such skills. The girl, lowering her eyes a little sadly, replied that there was a good reason for it, but the story was too sad, and she didn't want a child like him to hear it. Wilbert, however, objected sharply. He was a future great duke and should not be treated like a child. After a short pause, Elsha began her story. She admitted that her mother had died right after she was born, and she had no memories of her. Wilbert, frowning, asked what this had to do with her cooking skills. She continued that she was raised by another woman instead of her mother. The maid Maria is a close friend of her mother's. The woman had often told her about someone she had never known, and the girl had a desire to touch her past in some way. So she began recreating her mother's favorite dishes by studying recipes from different regions. That's how she learned to make the carrot cake that was now in front of Wilbert. The boy, pondering her words, said he believed her. But he added that it was strange why she had not assigned such work to cooks or servants. Elsha explained that she didn't want to distract anyone with her personal, in her opinion, whims. Everyone had a job to do. Besides, she had a lot of free time because all the teachers were given to her younger sister. Wilbert realized why she didn't have magic. But he also realized that in front of him was not just a useless bride, as he might have thought before, but a cheerful, kind, purposeful girl, albeit different from others. He quietly suggested that she was being treated unfairly, though she herself tried to show everything in a positive light. Elsha apologized for not being able to conjure up any fond memories for him, despite her best efforts. But Wilbert countered that no apology was necessary. And with a sudden determination, he asked her to make that pie again. Elsha blushed at his words. But the boy hastened to add that she wasn't making anything up. He just wanted to give his little brother a treat. With a smile, the girl suggested that next time she would also try the vegetables and meat cooked on the coals, but the boy quickly stopped her, asking her not to go that far. As time went on, Elsha began to notice that ever since she had first made carrot cake for Wilbert, he had only begun to avoid her more. The boy, seeing her, blushed, lowered his gaze. Elsha, with a slight smile, wished him a good morning. Wilbur only embarrassingly walked past quickly, and the woman was shocked that she was ignored. As time went on, Elsha began to notice that ever since she had first made carrot cake for Wilbert, he had only begun to avoid her more. Every time the opportunity presented itself, he would discreetly leave or escape altogether. Slowly the thought crept into her heart. Maybe she really should back off and stop interfering with him, stop hoping for anything more. One day, walking down a familiar corridor, she heard some noise from behind one of the doors. The sound was disturbing, and the girl's heart clenched. Moving closer, she carefully pressed her ear against the door, trying to make out what was going on inside. After a moment, however, she pulled away, pushing the bad thoughts away from her. Remembering that her older brother was usually studying with Hugh, she looked out the window, and she made sure he was busy with another teacher. Throwing a worried glance at him, she decided to take a step she would normally have considered unacceptable. She opened the door from behind which the noise was coming, thinking that maybe it wouldn't be a big deal if she just peeked out a little. She saw a picture that shook her to the core of her being. Little Hugh was sitting in the room, clutching a soft toy. The teacher stood beside him, his face contorted with anger. He slammed the table with force, yelling loudly at the child. Hugh shuddered fearfully and clutched the toy tighter, as if seeking protection in it. Elsha couldn't believe what was happening. The teacher shouted that he had explained everything like an infant, chewing over every detail, but he still couldn't use magic. He questioned how a child from a noble family could be so incapable. Hugh's little body trembled with fear, and tears came to his eyes. The teacher continued to humiliate him, saying that if he couldn't even apologize, then he was incapable of learning or showing remorse. With those words, it came to Elsha's attention that the boy might not be able to speak. The teacher didn't stop. He questioned how the boy was going to live in an empire where magic was the pride and essence of the aristocracy, if he couldn't handle even the elementary. In such a condition, he said, Hugh would be a disgrace to the Isbell family, and he, the teacher, would have to get his hands dirty to bring such a student to mind. Elsha was shocked. She shuddered inside as she realized the injustice of what was happening. Hugh was only a child so young, and she could not believe that a grown man could treat him so cruelly. She hesitated, however. After all, she was an outsider, and her interference could only make matters worse. Meanwhile, the teacher snatched the toy from Hugh in anger. The boy sobbed, desperate to get her back. The teacher coldly said that it was not proper for aristocrats to carry around toys, and opening the window, said he now understood why Hugh had no parents. Hugh started to scream, choking back tears, not knowing what to do, but he had already swung to throw the toy out the window. It was at that moment that the girl stormed resolutely into the room and intercepted the man's arm. Clutching the toy in her arms, she firmly declared that she would not let him do that. Her voice was full of determination and pain. She said that no one has the right to say that someone is not worthy of love or good things in this world. Parents are not the measure of talent. Mr. Hugh is only a child who has not yet learned to express his feelings, and it is natural that he may find it difficult to learn magic. But that is no reason for humiliation. She added that if anyone was to blame for his failures, it was the teacher himself, unable to find an approach to the student. Those words shocked the man. But Elsha says he's not worthy of a student like Hugh and tells him to get out, because she realizes there are some things only she can do. The tutor, not believing her ears, tried to object, asking who she was to interfere. But Elsha no longer hesitated. Holding out the toy to Hugh, she answered firmly that it was not a stranger. And the man asked who she is. Her face reflected firmness, confidence, and genuine compassion. When asked who she was, she said without wavering that she was the Grand Duchess and the mother of these children. At that very moment, another man entered the room. His appearance interrupted the tense scene. Everyone in the room looked at him in surprise. It was the Grand Duke himself. Elsha recognized him immediately, and her eyes reflected genuine amazement. The girl realized in a daze that the Grand Duke himself was standing in front of her. Her mind frantically tried to comprehend what was happening and what it could mean. Everything inside clenched. Fear and confusion mingled into a lump, preventing me from taking a single step. The man, cold and majestic, slowly shifted his gaze to her, which sent a chill running down her spine, and questioned who she was. The girl, as if struck by thunder, pressed her trembling hand to her breast, unable to answer at once. At that moment, the teacher's voice sounded behind her back. He hastened to explain that he had been personally recommended by the ruler of the great Sainrail Empire as a mentor for Hugh. But the Duke didn't even turn around on him. he made it clear that the question was not addressed to him, but to the girl in front of him. Trying to cope with her excitement, Elsa squeezed her eyes shut for a moment. She wasn't sure if she was doing the right thing, but she couldn't stay silent. Gathering her strength, she said quietly that she was also here by His Majesty's decree, though she herself was not quite sure how to phrase her words properly. A troubling thought swirled in my mind. Did the Duke know about the marriage? And if so, how much? She felt her heart pounding frantically in her chest. Closing her eyes, she took a deep breath. There was no time to waste. It had to be said. The girl raised her hand a little tentatively and called out her name. The Duke continued to stare at her in silence. His gaze was as unforgiving as the eternal cold of the mountains. Elsa felt the heat of shame begin to creep up her cheeks, but she too remained silent, not knowing what else to say. There was silence in the room. The atmosphere was becoming more and more tense. Suddenly, another man entered the room. The little boy's little feet get into a pose for a greeting. Wilbert bows and talks about how glad he is to be home. But the man did not answer. He cast a fleeting glance at the boy, expressing no emotion at all. Elsa furtively glanced at the child. Then she shifted her gaze to the Duke, who at this time stepped closer to her, and again with pressure asked the same question, who she was. The girl's consciousness blurred. She felt her legs go cotton, words stuck in her throat. Her gaze for a moment found the face of Wilbert, who stood a little farther away. He was red as a poppy, embarrassed, and didn't know how to help. He averted his eyes, unable to meet her gaze. Elsa realized she had no one to count on. Looking at the Duke again, she saw the expectation in his cold gaze. She was being too suspicious, and this silence could ruin her. Everyone in the room still stands in silence. Elsa decides she has to do something. Looking back, she saw Hugh trembling, clutching his toy in his arms as if it were his last source of comfort. The sight of it gave her her strength back. She couldn't back down. Not now, not after everything she'd already done. Raising her head, Elsa met the Duke's gaze and finally spoke decisively. The girl said that this was their first meeting, and that she was to be his consort by His Majesty's decree. She bowed and introduced herself as the daughter of the Duke of Zonneberg. Not a single muscle on the Duke's face trembled. His voice was calm, but there was cold steel in it. He said he wasn't sure if the formalities for the marriage had been completed, and asked why she was being so presumptuous. Elsa, keeping her composure, replied that she understood the situation perfectly well, but had been forced to intervene due to extraordinary circumstances. The teacher, she said, behaved in a totally inappropriate manner, and eventually his actions turned into open aggression against Mr. Hugh. Wilbert, who had been silent until now, realized with horror that someone was hurting his little brother, and the Duke turned his gaze to the teacher. He started to justify himself in confusion, but Elsa's words sounded decisive. She told how the tutor tried to throw away a toy dear to the child's heart, and it was at that moment that she introduced herself as the Grand Duchess to stop him. All eyes once again focused on the Duke. Little Hugh, without saying a word, pointed his finger at the teacher with a trembling hand. The room froze in anticipation. Elsa stood motionless in tense silence, waiting for the Duke's decision. The tutor, sensing the atmosphere thickening, began to back away, mumbling that she had misunderstood everything, and that Hugh was too young and unable to adequately appreciate what was happening. He appealed to the Duke, claiming it was some kind of mistake, that the boy was just angry because of the severity. But at that moment, something changed in the room. The air became icy. Shivers ran down my spine. The cold shrouded everything around them, and everyone's breath became visible. White vapor escaped from their mouths. The floor beneath his feet began to frost over. The Duke stepped forward slowly, and it was impossible to look away from his presence. He took a threatening stance and looked into the teacher's eyes and asked what else he wanted to say to her. At the same instant, one of the teacher's feet froze, instantly embedded in a thick block of ice stuck to the floor. He cried out, panicking, trying to free himself, but the ice wouldn't budge. Wilbert wondered with a slight smile if the tutor was going home, and if he would like some help with magic. His eyes lit up with increasing magical energy, and he cast a spell that instantly froze the tutor's other leg. Ice engulfed him up to his ankles, and the man found himself shackled by the cold. The Duke stepped closer, looking down at the tutor from top to bottom, and holding back his anger, asked if he was willing to give up his job. With a jerk, pulling him from the icy shackles, the Duke said that negligent tutors had no place in the Isbel house. Then he swung the doors open with force and pushed him out. The tutor trembled with fear, pivoted until he fell. Then he jumped up and, leaving his boots behind him, rushed away with all his legs. Elsa watched with bated breath. Now she knew for sure that the Duke spared no one. His magic struck indiscriminately, regardless of whether you were an ally or an adversary. He was an intimidating, truly great man. After all this, the Duke approached the girl, slightly bent over and expressed his gratitude for the help. However, the conversation did not end there. They had much more to discuss, but before that, they needed to finalize all the formalities. Only a few days had passed. Elsha stood in front of the massive doors, dressed in a gorgeous wedding gown. She hadn't expected that underneath the Duke's words about formalities was a wedding. It's only been 3 days since he's been back, and in that time they've hardly seen each other, so busy have they been. Nevertheless, they are getting married. It was also the day the polar night began, a rare and disturbing phenomenon that was considered a bad omen in the Empire and the sun-worshipping Grand Duchies. Polar night diminished the light of the deity, and in the Grand Duchy it could last for months. Elsha remembered that on the day she was born and the day her mother died, the longest polar night in history had begun in the capital. Suddenly the door swung open, and a magnificent view opened up before her, the temple illuminated by soft magical light, and in the distance he, the Duke, in ceremonial attire. His appearance was majestic and understatedly beautiful. The announcement of the bride's entrance swept through the hall. Suddenly Elsha's body was enveloped by magic power, and she was gently lifted into the air. Smoothly approaching the Duke, she was slightly embarrassed, realizing how unusual this performance looks. Never before had she thought she would be floating in the air, looking up at such a powerful man from above. The magic was truly amazing. As she approached, he held out his hand to her, a large, strong hand with many scars from past battles. She gently placed her palm in his and slowly lowered herself to the floor beside him. The priest began the ceremony. He turned to the groom, asking if he would swear to stand by his bride, Elsha Sonneberg, in sickness and in health. The man said firmly and calmly, "I swear by the shining sun." Then the same question was asked of the bride, and she, a little anxious, also took her vows. At that moment, the hall filled with guests exploded with applause. Among those present were Hugh and Wilbert, sitting not far away. As she watched, Elsha realized that even an event as significant as the polar night could be overshadowed by the light of a great miracle, the magic and celebration of a new family. When all the ceremonial formalities were over, she finally had time to talk to the Duke. They were to discuss the present and future of their new life. She had been told that on her wedding night she should trust her husband completely, but she knew almost nothing about etiquette or expectations. Even so, she was sure she could handle it. And after a while, they both lay on the bed at night. The girl looks at him a little embarrassed with her bright red eyes, and the Duke is lying there not realizing what's going on. He blushed a little, himself not realizing what was happening to him. The girl, watching him from under her ajar lashes, suddenly blushed too. A vague sensation swept over her, the realization of what was happening between them now. She didn't understand what had changed, but she could sense that something was wrong with him. A recent memory popped into her mind, how she sat on the bed waiting for the Duke. She lowered her gaze meekly, her luxurious curls falling softly over her shoulders, and she was wearing a beautiful nightgown adorned with a delicate floral pattern. Suddenly a man entered the room, exactly the man she had been waiting for. He slowly walked toward her and stopped right in front of her. The girl, a little embarrassed, thanked him. He looked at her carefully and, after a moment, calmly replied that he had, in fact, done nothing worth thanking him for. Elsha was surprised at his words. The man continued. He had only married her on His Majesty's orders, and as a husband he intended to respect her position. He promised that he would do his best to ensure that she would not be inconvenienced in their life together. She thanked him again, this time sincerely. After all, she was prepared for anything: anger, contempt, coldness. After all, the Duke was known for his rigidity, a war-obsessed man who seemed to need neither wife nor love. But instead, she saw a gentleman before her. Her thoughts were interrupted by his voice. He said he wasn't planning to have children anytime soon. The girl looked at him attentively, waiting for him to continue. Then she smiled softly and agreed with him, for after all, Hugh or Wilbert might inherit the title. The Duke was silent for a moment, then added, "That's not the only reason. He doesn't want her to expect love, affection, or anything more than respect from him." These words shook Elsha. A strange feeling came over her, a mixture of pain and emptiness. He turned away, apologizing, and headed leisurely for the exit. The girl hesitated. For some reason she felt hurt, although it seemed she shouldn't feel anything for this man. And then an unexpected thought popped into her head. She stops him and asks him to wait. The man stops and, without turning around, asks what else she wants to discuss. Suddenly Elsha was in front of him, blocking the way to the exit. Did he feel the same way about his children? She said it boldly, almost defiantly. His face frowned. Such boldness did not please him. But she repeated the question. Was he really as cold and indifferent to them? He replied that he was just doing his duty to be their new father. But the girl immediately reminded him of Hugh, to whom he had brought a totally incompetent tutor. At that moment, the man realized he had made a mistake, and he clucked his tongue in irritation, not knowing what to say in response. Elsha continued. She's not going to blame him for his parenting methods, but after all, his children now have no friends or adults they can rely on. Their lives are not only about discipline, but also about love, care, and attention. And then the Duke asks, what does she propose to do? Does she want to put them in an orphanage? But does he himself realize that raising children is an important part of their lives, and do they lack love? She was gently leading him to believe that parenting was not a formality, but the foundation of the future. Not only feelings are needed, but also a comfortable environment, physical well-being, and quality education. The man is a little surprised at these words. Elsha goes on to say that even without his love, she will remain a great duchess. And the Duke averts his gaze and thinks for a moment. The woman says if he's not going to show love to the kids, he should leave their upbringing to her. His reaction was restrained, but there was a tense rethinking going on inside. When she got too close, he tried to pull away, grabbing her by the shoulders. But at that moment, he lost his balance and they both fell. The position was awkward, and the girl felt it immediately. A silence hung in the room, broken only by the noise from outside. They turned around and saw two boys in the doorway, frozen with surprise. Wilbert, having entered the room and witnessed the unexpected scene, turned to those present in confusion, expressing evident bewilderment at what they were doing. Elsha immediately instinctively pulled away from the Duke and made an attempt to justify herself, but under the pressure of the moment she was unable to formulate a coherent response. The boy, not receiving a satisfactory explanation, asked again what exactly she wanted to tell him. But the girl in response only looked at him fearfully, unable to utter a word. At that moment, a thought that has become pivotal to him pops into Wilbert's mind. With sudden determination, he approaches Elsha and takes her hand. His gesture was abrupt, almost impulsive, and the girl, not understanding anything, only became more confused. With a worried expression on his face, Wilbert suddenly suggests that Elsha should spend the night with them. Such an unexpected statement confuses her. She had not expected such a request. The Duke, who had been watching in silence until now, also appeared surprised, not understanding exactly what was behind this initiative of the boy. Meanwhile, Wilbert, still tense, explains that during the time the Duke was away, Elsha worked tirelessly caring for the house and children, and often fell asleep beside them. Before he can finish, however, he himself begins to blush and get lost in thought, feeling embarrassed. In an effort to shift his attention, he mentions his younger brother, as if hoping the latter will help him complete his thought. Hugh, at first not realizing what is required of him, looks at his brother apprehensively, but catching his gesture, a slight movement of the hand that hints at the need to play along. He is instantly permeated by the situation. The boy runs up to Elsha and suddenly hugs her from behind, pulling her tightly against him. Then, with his head down, he grasps her skirt and mooed quietly, like a toddler unable to express emotion in words. Elsha's breath caught, and her heart began to beat faster. She wasn't ready for such a display of affection and didn't realize what it all meant. The Duke is watching closely, not hiding his surprise. Wilbert seizes the moment and continues, saying that his little brother can't sleep without Elsha and often cries if she's not around. At this point, Hugh begins to sob, either getting into character or genuinely moved. Wilbert eagerly states that this is the reason he asks that Elsha not be kicked out, emphasizing his younger brother's well-being. A faint but sincere spark of hope lights up in Hugh's eyes. Gradually, the girl begins to realize that the children apparently took her conversation with the Duke as a quarrel that might have led to her leaving. Perhaps they thought she was going to be sent away. Wilbert speaks with sincerity about how, despite her awkwardness, she would never hurt them. His words sounded like a defense, like a plea to preserve the coziness they were just beginning to get used to. Elsha casts a glance at the Duke, waiting for his reaction. The man still sits silent, a mixture of bewilderment and confusion in his gaze. He couldn't believe how quickly and deeply the children had become attached to her, even though it had only been a short time. He'd never seen boys show feelings so openly, especially toward an adult they'd known so briefly. The girl remained silent, but she thought to herself that he was right. The Duke says he has one condition. His words sound stern, and the children hold their breath, fearing that he might decide to send Elsha away after all. After a brief pause, the Duke admits that he can't ignore what's going on and agrees to their proposal. However, after a little hesitation, he clarifies, "Tonight they will all sleep together, the four of them." The reaction to this statement was unexpected. Everyone present was stunned, except Hugh, who was genuinely excited about the possibility of spending the night together. The girl was genuinely surprised. Her heart thumped alarmingly when she heard the Duke's proposal. So unexpected it seemed. She even thought she had misheard, and for a moment she thought it was just a play of imagination. But Wilbert's glance quickly brought her back to reality. The boy frowned and expressed his displeasure. He didn't want to sleep with the Duke and his younger brother. A slight contempt slid into his gaze as he glanced toward the girl behind him. The room fell into an awkward silence. The air seemed to stagnate, and even the candles seemed to burn more quietly. But the Duke, without changing his expression, calmly confirmed that no one had misheard, and he was not going to refuse his offer. His words sounded firm, even cold. The girl, still a little flustered, couldn't figure out exactly what thoughts lay behind his calmness. The man, in turn, watched her with that same icy, detached gaze that held no warmth or doubt. Elsha's thoughts were racing. She remembered that just a short time ago he had made it clear that he had no love for her, no desire to care for her. And now this proposal. Everything seemed illogical to her. Perhaps he simply didn't trust her, the daughter of a foreign house imposed by the emperor. Maybe he thought she shouldn't be left alone with the children. Meanwhile, the Duke said with equanimity, "If any of them have any objection, let them speak now." The girl quietly remarked that the children would probably be uncomfortable. But her gaze fell on Hugh, sleepy with tired eyes, he was barely on his feet, and said there was nothing wrong with it, and she basically agreed. Afterward, she took the boy's small hand in her warm palm. Then Elsha changed her tone and gently asked if he was willing to do it. The boy nodded approvingly, and a genuine, warm smile appeared on his face. After a while, all four of them were already in the spacious bed. The girl was between the children. She looked fondly at the sleeping Wilbert, his long lashes trembling in his sleep. And then she looked at Hugh, who was clutching his favorite soft toy in his hands, never parting with it even in his sleep. They were obviously exhausted. They fell asleep almost instantly. But Elsha was still uncomfortable. She could feel the Duke watching her. He was lying next to her, and his gaze was heavy, penetrating. It seemed he was not just looking at her, but studying her. She knew a mother was supposed to sleep between children, but that didn't make the tension in her chest any less. Suddenly Wilbert began to stir, making anxious noises. The girl was wary. She pulled herself up and noticed the boy punching a pillow in his sleep, muttering words, begging Elsha not to be kicked out. The sight touched her to the core. The Duke, too, watched him with wonder. The girl suddenly realized the boy was so much worried about her that he could not find peace even in his sleep. My heart clenched. At that moment, the Duke said, without rising from his pillow, that he now understood what it was like to attract the attention of the grumpy and stubborn Wilbert. Elsha threw him a look that read a slight resentment. She said quietly that this boy was really not easy to get along with. He tried his best to appear mature so as to cause less trouble, but he was still a child at heart. You had to be especially careful with him. You had to choose your words, avoid pressure, or you could easily get hurt. The Duke, hearing this, felt a surge of irritation. The words sounded to him like a reproach, like a hint of indifference. His cold stare became almost frightening. The girl felt her insides clench as if ice was running down her spine, unquietly saying that she now understood why children felt anxious all the time. The man didn't answer, continuing to stare at her. He just turned away, laid back and closed his eyes. Elsha, shivering, followed suit. She was shaking slightly, not from the cold, but from the weight of unspoken words and the distrust hanging over them. She knew that the Duke had married her not willingly, but at the Emperor's command. But the reality still seemed more complicated than just following orders. The Duke was awake. He lay with his eyes open, staring at the floor. His thoughts took him back in time to the moment when the Emperor, sitting on his throne, announced that he had already chosen his bride. He then asked if he had chosen where the wedding would be held, or perhaps what to do about the border of a neighboring state. The Duke was surprised to hear about the wedding and said that after the expedition was over, he would just like to spend time in his territory. His response was silence, and then a goblet of wine flew in his direction. Emperor Adler raged then, shouting that the Duke had dared to disobey his will. These memories brought no comfort. The man frowned, clicked his tongue irritably, and pressed his lips together. Then he slowly turned toward Elsha and the children. Lifting himself up, he looked at her sleeping face. Despite his inner tension, His hand reached for hers as if on its own, without realization, without intention. He slowly reached for her, and his palm rested on her tender, vulnerable throat. His eyes narrowed and his expression became cold and angry. He squeezed her neck lightly, not hard, but enough to feel how fragile and defenseless she was. Elsha frowned and murmured softly in her sleep, not waking up but reacting to the unpleasant pressure. The Duke froze. He suddenly realized how easily he could have hurt her. The thought of it was like an icy wind, the thought of it piercing him like an icy wind. The thought of that pierced him like an icy wind. But before he could realize what he was doing, his attention was caught by Hugh. The boy clung to Elsha tighter, as if he wanted to protect her even in his sleep. His face was calm and happy, and he seemed completely at peace beside her. On the other side, he noticed Wilbert, from whom the blanket had slid off. The boy was stirring in his sleep, opening his shoulder and looking vulnerable. The man pulled his hand away sharply, as if he'd been burned. He felt a strange, lingering feeling inside him, a mixture of shame, confusion, and guilt. The Duke held his gaze for a moment, then leaned over and covered it carefully. Despite the suspicions that gnawed at his soul, he thought Elsha was a spy sent by the Emperor himself, a spy who was a master at winning his trust. He couldn't ignore the obvious. The children were really attached to her. And yet, deep down, he didn't blame the girl, but himself. He knew he hadn't been a good father. That fact was weighing on him, as did the realization that he might not be the most worthy Duke. His gaze fell on Hugh again. There was a faint sadness in the man's eyes. He didn't know what to do next, didn't know what to do with this woman, with the children, with himself. The image of his older brother suddenly surfaced in front of his inner gaze. He remembered how he and his wife lovingly embraced their son, little Wilbert, and how their home was filled with laughter and light. Then they were rejoicing together when they noticed Rolf. The memory was so vivid that the man covered his eyes for a moment. Morning came. Elsha woke up with a heaviness in her body. It felt like she hadn't slept at all. Getting up carefully so as not to disturb the children, she slowly put on her slippers and sat on the edge of the bed. With a quiet groan, she stretched, feeling achingly tired. Then she sneezed loudly. The air in the room was cool. And she realized that if she stayed in just her nightgown, she would definitely catch a cold. Slipping out the door, she spent some time in the other room, changing her clothes. The warmth finally returned to her body. But just as she was about to return, she was alerted by someone's voice calling her. She didn't immediately realize who it was, but she guessed it was probably Wilbert waking up and not finding her around to worry. Without thinking, she hurried back and swung the door open. An unexpected scene appeared before her. The Duke was standing in front of the boys, trying to explain something. He seemed to be assuring them that he had no intention of kicking Elsha out. It was obvious that he was not used to such situations and felt uncomfortable. At that moment, Wilbert, not noticing Elsha, came upon her in the doorway. The blow was not strong. The boy only bounced back slightly. The Duke immediately let him go when he saw that he was unhurt. A look of slight surprise appeared on his face as he looked at the girl standing in front of him. He held her gaze for a moment, then discreetly wished her good morning, calling her Miss. Elsha only watched him confusedly in response, still not fully understanding what was really going on. Wilbert, who was standing nearby, was genuinely surprised to hear what was said. He immediately realized how important and meaningful this moment was. The Duke only glimpsed a glimpse of his son. Then his gaze turned again to Elsha. With a slight restraint in his voice, he expressed his gratitude to the girl for her constant care of his children. He also noted that he would be happy to see her not only as Hugh and Wilbert's mother, but as a full part of their family. His younger brother, present nearby, could not hide his joy and literally glowed with delight. Even Wilbert, usually reserved, seemed imbued with the warmth of what was going on and took the speech with approval. Elsha, showing respect, bowed and thanked the Duke for his trust in her. The latter, however, despite his benevolence, got straight to the point. He said that they needed to discuss the rules of life together as soon as possible. Their marriage was at the will of the Emperor, which meant that it was important to recognize the obvious. They knew almost nothing about each other, having grown up in different regions, influenced by different traditions and cultures. The girl listened attentively to his reasoning and, inwardly agreeing, recognized his rightness. Indeed, such differences can cause misunderstandings, especially when it comes to parenting. Therefore, in order to avoid possible conflicts in the future, they should have agreed in advance on the basic principles of living together. The Duke, for his part, wished not only to set the rules, but to better understand Elsha's real intentions. The girl felt it and readily agreed. It was important to find out where it was possible to make concessions and where it would be necessary to seek a compromise. And suddenly, as it often happens in moments of serious conversations, there was an unexpected sound in the room. Someone's stomach rumbled loudly. An awkward silence hung for a moment. Wilbert hastily stated that it wasn't him. Elsha also expressed surprise and denial. All eyes turned to Hugh, who stood, blushing thickly and rubbing his belly in embarrassment. The atmosphere was diffused when the girl took the situation into her own hands, saying it was her stomach. She admitted that she was very hungry and didn't have time to eat breakfast. The Duke picked up on the thought with a slight smile and motioned for everyone to head to breakfast. Together, they made their way to the spacious dining room, where a set table awaited them, bursting with a variety of dishes, from eggs and meat appetizers to exquisite side dishes. Settling each in his own place, they began their meal. Duke suggested using this time to discuss the important issues raised earlier. Elsha, watching Wilbert, who was wrinkling his nose at the sight of fish and vegetables, agreed with interest. She realized that in order to connect with the children, she needed to find out what they liked and what they didn't like. This was part of her new role, which she was going to fulfill responsibly. Rolf, approaching the issue in a systematic way, suggested first identifying the current problems. Elsha started talking about the living conditions and surroundings, but suddenly there was a loud sneeze. The Duke remarked that she must be cold and explained that their house used magic to regulate the temperature. Hearing about the woman being cold quite a bit, he looks at her unhappily. A servant, noticing the Duke's reaction, came to Elsha and explained that the climate in the imperial capital was quite different, and therefore the girl might be uncomfortable. She was immediately handed a warm blanket. Rolf, having assessed the situation, decided that the first thing to do was to provide Elsha with suitable clothing and necessary items. Wilbert enthusiastically suggested we all go together and pick out everything we need. Hugh, seated at the table, cheerfully raised his hand, expressing his desire to participate. Her older brother remarked that since Elsha grew up in a different culture, her taste in clothing might be peculiar, so he insisted that they pick out new outfits themselves. It was becoming increasingly difficult for the girl to navigate the new family. Even in the matter of clothes, they began to dictate terms to her. She remembered the dress she had arrived in. Elsha explained that there was no need to worry about her taste. The outfit she'd chosen was the work of a designer in the capital, whom she'd contacted after her stepmother had rejected all her options. Wilbert looked puzzled, whereas the Duke, without giving it much thought, said that it was now clear. After agreeing on ground rules, he suggested we go to town. There was a real winter fairy tale outside. Neat houses were covered with snow and hoarfrost. The air was fresh and invigorating. They found a women's clothing store and went inside. After a while, Elsha emerged from the fitting room wearing an elegant red dress. She looked at her family with a slight smile, waiting for their reaction. The Duke and the children stood together, scrutinizing her. Wilbert looked away embarrassed, noting that the dress was both beautiful and practical. Elsha wanted to hear more. She was expecting praise. The older brother discreetly remarked that it was more the dress that made a person attractive, not the other way around. The Duke, watching the fitting, noted that considering how quickly they had picked everything out, the outfits looked quite dignified. The children, however, were in no hurry to stop, and insisted on picking out even more clothes. Elsha, unaccustomed to such attention, watched their enthusiasm with surprise. After a while, she reappeared from the fitting room. Now she was wearing a dark blue dress with a tight waist, decorated with elegant patterns. The image looked noble and elegant. A little later, she was already trying on a new fur coat with fluffy trim and white inserts, finished off with a warm hat to match. As the Duke was about to move on to the next outfit, Elsha gently reminded him that this was more than enough already. She remembered that the trip was not only an opportunity to pick up new clothes, but also a chance to get to know each other better, to immerse herself in his family's culture. Realizing this girl realizes that they didn't just come here to shop, at that moment she noticed a huge rack hung with dresses and many brightly colored boxes nearby. There were so many clothes, enough to change outfits every day for a month. Hugh suddenly came up to her and, tugging at her sleeve, tried to get her attention. Elsha, unsuspecting, turned around, and I was stunned by what I learned. The boy led her to more dresses. At the same time, Wilbert's voice rang out. He excitedly announced that he had found another beautiful dress. The store employee held up a purple outfit, and Wilbert excitedly declared that if Elsha wore it, she would instantly transform into a real princess. The brothers' eyes met, and a silent rivalry began between them. Each insisted in his own way that his choice was better. Their argument grew more and more intense until the Duke intervened. He calmly noted that because of their excessive activity, Elsa was in a difficult position. She was literally being pulled in different directions. Wilbert quickly realized this and relented. Hugh expressed displeasure at first, but then also stopped. The girl heaved a sigh of relief. The Duke, noticing this, proposed a simple solution. To avoid further arguments, he would simply buy all the outfits. Elsa was shocked, and the boys, on the contrary, came to delight. In their eyes, it was a real celebration. She tried to understand how he was going to choose exactly what she was going to wear if absolutely everything was going to be bought. But the Duke, not allowing any objections, said that the decision had already been made. This was the first of the established rules. He recognizes her as his wife and Grand Duchess, which means they should spend as much time together as possible, building their relationship on respect and communication. At the same time, he made it clear that she was to take on the duties of a housekeeper. From now on, Elsa would be in charge of the household, which would allow the Duke to attend important meetings more often without being distracted by the family's internal affairs. He asked her to do her best to handle this new role. Elsa sensed how unusual she was about financial matters. Her frugality seemed almost naive, especially for a duke's daughter. This characteristic gave her emotions a sincerity, a purity, and the behavior is unconventional. The Duke suddenly looked at her intently, and Elsa noticed his strange gaze. When she asked what was wrong, he seemed to come to his senses, averted his eyes, and declared that nothing had happened. Soon he suggested that next time they go out to pick out headdresses. Unlike Elsa, the brothers were delighted. They took a friendly trip to a new store where they picked up lots of beautiful hats and accessories. Returning home, everyone looked happy and enthusiastic. The shopping had clearly been a success. Back at the mansion, Elsa felt very tired. She had never imagined that shopping could be so exhausting. Apparently, she just wasn't used to this kind of event, especially at this volume. Lately, even things that hadn't seemed difficult before had begun to bore her quickly. Nevertheless, she was pleased that she had finally been given a room of her own. When she remembered the second rule, she thought about it for a moment. Elsa was allowed to sleep with the children if they wanted to, but at least once a week they must spend the night in the marital bedroom to discuss accountability and joint issues. For some reason, it was the word report that made her feel a little wistful, but right now she wanted more than anything to rest after such a busy day. As she opened the door to her room, she suddenly noticed a female figure in the semi-darkness. The silhouette was blurry, but familiar features gradually emerged. The girl turned around and pronounced that Elsa had returned quite late. It was her half-sister Karen. Elsa was shocked to see her half-sister in her room. She was struck by Karen's very presence in this place, and she immediately asked what she was doing here. As it turned out, the girl had originally been taken to the living room, but she was quickly bored there, and taking advantage of the fact that they were related after all, Karen decided to come to her small bedroom. Elsa was about to remind her to respect personal boundaries next time, but her sister, ignoring it, suddenly started looking at the outfits, commenting on their appearance and noting with unexpected flattery what good taste Elsa had. One of the outfits particularly caught her eye. She reached for it with interest, but Elsa stopped her lightning fast, standing between her sister and her dresses, not allowing her to touch. With cold firmness in her voice, she made it clear that she would not tolerate anyone touching her things without permission. Karen, pretending not to understand, feigned surprise, but Elsa did not fall for this manipulation. She explained that all these outfits were gifts from the Grand Duke, and that they were not in their ancestral home. Things were different here, and personal belongings should be treated with respect. Karen's face frowned. Elsa was practically forcibly sent to live in this remote place she was rumored to have an aversion to. Karen replied that it was all horrible, but not so worried about her that she was sent to check on her sister. She explained with a caustic smile that it had long been discussed in the capital how the Duke had allegedly left Elsa alone for a month, though the sister hastened to assure me that it was only a misunderstanding. Karen didn't believe it and giggled slyly. The conversation took an even more unpleasant turn when Karen suddenly noticed a vial of magic tonic on the nightstand and wondered with interest if Elsa was taking it properly. The girl remembered how she had been urged to begin a course of reception immediately after the wedding. Supposedly in her present condition, she was not fit to be the wife of the Grand Duke. She replied briefly that she was drinking it as directed, and now everyone was just waiting for the effects to show. Karen laughed, saying that she would have to be strong, because if she was useless, she wouldn't hesitate to be kicked out. Elsha remained silent, but her gaze turned cold. She was clearly hurt by this conversation. She discreetly clarified if her sister had really gone all the way just to make fun of her. Karen replied without blinking an eye that she had a more mundane purpose. She wanted to ask her for some money. With that, she made a cute expression, as if expecting compassion. This particularly angered Elsha. After all, Karen could always turn to her father for money, who had never turned her down. But Karen flared up, and dropping her pretense of gentleness, said sharply that she had an urgent need, which meant her younger sister had to help. She grabbed the jewelry box and, shouting for the woman to finally shut up and just give her the money, threw the box in her direction. The contents scattered across the floor. Rings, earrings, and necklaces glistened on the parquet. Elsha, shocked by her sister's rudeness, clucked her tongue indignantly. Karan, as if nothing had happened, explained that she was just going through a rough patch. And she's hoping for support, because they are family after all. Elsha froze for a second. She remembered scenes from the past, when she was still trying to be part of this family. She remembered the moment as she passed the room and heard Karen and her mother discussing the dress Karen was going to wear to the ball. Then, hearing the conversation, Elsha was frightened, for this dress had belonged to her late mother. She burst into the room and screamed in desperation that it belonged to her mom. In response, her stepmother shoved her coldly, stating that everything in the house belonged to the Duke, and now to her daughter. The girl tried to object to something, but didn't have time. Karen only supported these words by saying that her mother is right and she has every right to wear this dress. Afterward, both left the room, discussing which necklace would go with the outfit. It was then that Elsha realized clearly for the first time that there was only one daughter for them, Karen. And she herself is no longer a part of this family. Her sister's voice snapped her out of her memories. She said 10 gold pieces would be enough for the first time. The woman replied that she wouldn't give her anything. Karen lowered the bar to 5 gold. But after realizing that wasn't going to happen either, she looked down as if she was thinking of something. Sighing, she leaned over and, noticing one of the necklaces that had fallen, said with feigned innocence that if she didn't get the money, she'd just take it. Elsha, discreetly but with firmness in her voice, warned her not to dare to do so. But Karen, as if not hearing her, asked why Elsha wouldn't pick up the jewelry herself then, since it was so precious to her. And the next instant, without waiting for an answer, she roughly stepped her shoe on the precious necklace, trying to crush it. All of Karen's actions finally shocked Elsha. She stood in a daze, unable to believe the insolence and impudence with which her sister was behaving. And the latter, as if in mockery, only grinned, as if the whole situation amused her, and without concealing the sarcasm, threw in a question, what she would do. But Elsha's patience was breaking. She pulled herself together and approached her sister with determination, leaving no shadow of doubt about her actions. Her hand flew into the air, and the next second there was a sharp clap, a resounding slap. Karen, who had not expected such a thing, recoiled. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she struggled, almost hysterically, to understand what was happening. But Elsha was calm. She stated firmly that her sister must be completely clueless. All these things are not just beautiful jewelry or rich dresses. They are the property of a great duke, a man who trusts her. This was especially true of the necklace that was a personal gift from her husband. Karen, holding her cheek, exclaimed that Elsha had fully embraced the role of the Duke's wife and was now pretending to be something she wasn't. According to her, it was all just a mask. She reproached Elsha for not knowing how to use magic, and her words were contemptuous. And yet, despite that, Elsha did have knowledge and experience, more than she had, for all intents and purposes. Yet there was one important difference between this house and the one they had grown up in. Here, Elsha was respected. Here she was treated with kindness and warmth. The Duke trusted her not just with his estates or his patronage, but with something much more. He was ready to entrust her with the education of his own children. She remembered one of the house rules. The Duke would recognize Elsha as his wife and potential mentor for the children, but she had to pass a kind of exam, prove she could handle the role. Failure on this test would mean being disqualified from teaching them. As she picked up the precious necklace from the floor, she mentally noted how important it was for her to live up to that trust. She knew that the Duke was treating her with respect, giving her a chance not just to be near him, but to truly have a place in his life and the lives of his children. Here, within these walls, she was trying to create an environment where she could feel like an equal. That's why she can't afford to lend money to a girl who has disrespected not only her, but the Duke as well. It would be a betrayal of his trust. Karen's eyes filled with anger. She clearly hadn't expected to be rejected. But Elsa was already turning away, intending to leave the room. She pulled a small silver bell from her pocket and rang it. A few seconds later, a maid entered the room and awaited orders. In a calm tone, the girl asked to take the guest luggage to the guest room in the building reserved for servants. Karen's reaction was instantaneous. She raised her head sharply, not hiding her indignation. But Elsa only emphasized that she thought this option was the best possible, and that if her sister didn't agree, there was nothing stopping her from going further, straight to the street. With a dismissive grin, Karen muttered something sarcastic. With a loud clatter, she stomped out of the room, leaving a trail of tension behind her. Elsa, on the other hand, exhaled in relief. She was alone and allowed herself to relax for a moment. Still in thought, she involuntarily thought about the word family again. Is it possible for those around her now to truly accept her as their own? She couldn't know for sure, but the thought of the Duke's children warmed her heart. She imagined they would be happy to help her pick up the scattered jewelry. And the Duke himself probably wouldn't even be angry, and maybe he'd just buy her new ones. These images brought a slight smile to Elsa's face. She knew she would do her best to be part of a large and loving family. Before leaving, she carefully gathered the jewels and closed the box, determined to tell the Grand Duke everything at the first opportunity. But even then, she couldn't understand why Karen had come to her. Why had she asked her for money when her father had always provided for her generously? Something wasn't right here. Perhaps the money was needed for something she couldn't tell her parents about. Elsa wondered if it was gambling. Absorbed in thought, she suddenly heard a light knock on the door. Distracted, she quietly allowed entry. The door opened and little Hugh appeared on the threshold. It was as if the very air in the room became warmer at once. When Elsa noticed Hugh stomping in place, looking around, and then looking right at her with a pitying stare, she knew at once that something was wrong. He tried to explain what was bothering him using only gestures, outlining a circle with his hands, then showed the little ears, after which he pretended to hold something in his arms and rock him. Her perceptive mind quickly grasped the point. The boy seemed to have lost his stuffed toy. Hugh, hearing her guess, nodded quietly, his gaze lowered to the floor. His eyes, large and warm, expressed the sadness in them. He showed without words how sound asleep he was, and then he woke up and couldn't find the toy anymore. Elsa looks at it all and absorbs it intently. There was a sincere longing in his silence, and the girl felt her heart clench. He then pointed to the pile of gifts stacked behind her back. The girl thought for a moment, and then it hit her. Perhaps the toy fell out of his hands while he slept next to those boxes in the wagon during the long drive. Everything suddenly fell into place. With a slight smile, she adjusted the gloves on her hands and offered to look for the toy together. The two of them began to take the boxes apart, checking each one carefully. Hugh was having fun. He was trying on different hats, laughing and even modeling. Even asked the servants to help in this trouble. They walked all over the mansion, looking in every corner, but the stuffed toy was nowhere to be found. And then, almost out of hope, the boy pressed himself against her arm. His small fingers squeezed her fabric as if asking for support, and then she realized there was only one place left where they hadn't searched. It was a cold and snowy street. Just the thought of it made her freeze. It was cold and snowy outside, and the idea of leaving the confines of the cozy mansion was unsettling. But Hugh was suddenly struck with a brilliant idea. As if he had read her mind, he suddenly took off and ran away. She didn't even have time to call out to him. He returned a few moments later, carrying a warm and fluffy blanket. Seriously and carefully, he cradled her shoulders like a caring adult, and then carefully placed a white winter hat on her head. Elsa couldn't contain her surprise. The gesture was unexpected, but incredibly touching. At that moment, she hugged the boy tightly, sensing how kind and sensitive he could be. When she first met Hugh, she thought he was quite unlike his older brother. But now she realized, in caring and kindness, they were not inferior to each other. And yet the question of why Hugh was not speaking still kept her wondering. The thought made her sad. There was nothing she could do to help him. Hugh stiffened in her arms, a little confused. And then the girl gently pulled him away, reminding him that they still needed to finish their search. They walked together out into the snowy yard. The sky was covered with heavy clouds, the snowflakes falling slowly and thickly, hiding everything around them. The whiteness surrounded them on all sides, and the air itself seemed to tingle with cold. Elsa asked the boy to stay on the porch. After all, he mustn't catch cold. And she herself, overcome with anxiety, took a step to the side. But no sooner had she taken a few steps than her foot suddenly sank into the loose snow. Losing her balance, she fell. Hugh gave a startled shriek and immediately ran over to help her up. The girl apologized, assuring that everything was fine. But suddenly a strange silhouette in the snow caught her attention. At first she thought it was just an ordinary snowman, but when she looked more closely, she realized that it was not a snow figure, but the soft toy they had been looking for so long. They hurriedly picked up the find and went back to the mansion. Elsa breathed a sigh of relief. They had found it, but her joy was marred by the fact that the toy was soaked through. Hugh was visibly upset, and then he broke into a run again, this time toward the fireplace. He stepped closer and gingerly held the toy out to the fire, hoping the heat would dry it out. But Elsa, noticing how close he had gotten to the flames, jumped up alarmed. Only when the threat had passed did she allow herself to exhale. The soft fabric had soaked up moisture, and if left unchecked, it could deteriorate. The toy was still wet, and the girl felt truly sorry for the boy. She could feel how precious it was to him. Perhaps it was a symbol of comfort, something that gave him a sense of security. She decided she couldn't stay away any longer, so she put her hand to the pendant that hung around her neck. It was a smooth stone. As she touched it, she felt a wave of energy pass through her body, and the jewelry itself glowed with a soft but bright light illuminating her face. Warmth quickly filled her palm, as if a fire had been awakened inside. Elsa gently brought it to the soaked toy, concentrating all the strength she could muster. Yes, her magic was barely noticeable, almost intangible to experienced spellcasters, but even such a tiny skill could prove useful. Hugh watched with rapt attention, his green eyes shining like two emeralds. He seemed to absorb every spark of magic, mesmerized as it spilled into the room. Elsa hoped it was a sign that she had become at least a little stronger. The changes were minor, but she believed she was doing the right thing. Tensing every cell, she didn't let go of the magical impulse until she finally saw it. The toy was completely dry. She took her hand away from the stone, and the light slowly faded away, and she exhaled in relief, feeling the tension leave her body. Hugh jumped up to her and hugged his plush friend tightly, who was warm and dry again. The joy in his gaze was genuine. Despite her fatigue, Elsa felt only relief and happiness. She had been able to help him. She thought she might not make a strong mage, and there was nothing in her abilities to match the status of the ducal family. But it was that uncertainty that taught her to be resourceful and to use magic with heart, not rules. Noticing that the boy's hands were stiff from the cold, she took them in her palms and gently warmed them, transferring the remnants of her warmth. The magic that came from her was not strong but sincere. It made Hugh's body warm gradually, and a slight blush colored his cheeks. He glowed with joy, and Elsa looked at him fondly as if absorbing that light. Dinner time was approaching. She gently reminded him that since he had the toy with him again, he'd better take it to his room so he wouldn't lose it again. The boy nodded and hurried away, heading merrily down the hallway. But suddenly, almost at the door, he stopped abruptly. Elsa looked at him in surprise. Something had stopped him. Hugh turned around slowly, stood for a moment, and then turned back to her. She wondered, what had he forgotten? But the boy gestured for her to bend over. Not fully understanding what he wanted, Elsa leaned lower nonetheless. Hugh looked into her eyes with confusion, as if wondering if he would do what he had in mind. And then, without uttering a sound, his lips moved faintly as if he wanted to say something, though he couldn't. And the next moment, he kissed her cheek softly, barely touching her. Elsa froze, then blushed involuntarily. The gesture was so warm and innocent that her heart fluttered for a moment.